There we go. That wasn't passwords. Well, thank you all so much for logging in. When you all first reached out to me back in October, November, December, sometime around those areas, I really asked a lot of questions about what you all would want to hear, would need to hear. And the end verdict kind of came onto this whole association model, which isn't just specific to events. It's really everything, because everybody has an association. We have lots of associations. I'm here at the American Council of Education, which is an association. And there's the Hotel Lodging Association. There's associations for every field. And specifically, we are going to talk about how the conference plays into it, because that's what I was asked very specifically to speak about. But we will kind of go through and talk about association trends as well, because that's really important. I do have a slide thing, but if you haven't ever used PowerPoint as a virtual background, I highly recommend it. It's been a Zoom feature for like 3 years, and it's way underutilized. And I love it. It changes slides, especially when you're recording them to put online, because most of the time it's like a giant slide and then your face is really little in the corner. So I would highly recommend this if you've never used it before. So association models and how their conference fits. I have a bunch of slides with very little words, which is great. And then we're going to have lots of time for Q&A. So make sure that you're thinking of questions throughout, but also feel free to interrupt me on a certain slide. I'm not a save your questions till the end type of person. So just ask away. You can unmute, you can put it in the chat. Definitely ask me while it's there. So that's me. Other side, yay. So for those of you that I haven't talked to in a while, my role has changed quite a bit. I have been at the University of Nebraska for 4 years. I've had 4 different roles. And this year in 2023, in January, I started a new role. So now I'm doing 3 different things at the university. I still teach. I teach event and experience design in the Department of Nutrition, but I only teach 1 class a year. And then I'm also in extension. So I work statewide doing event strategy. And then I'm also doing educational strategy at the collegiate level for several of the colleges at the university of what does the faculty, staff, and student experience look like, and how can we redesign that? So my life's kind of wrapped into strategy right now, which is really interesting. And I'm really actually excited to speak today a little bit about my love of events and associations, because I don't get to speak about it a whole lot, but of course there's strategy in there as well. So everything that we're going to talk about is a funnel. So you specifically asked me to talk about how the conference fits into it, but you can't talk about that without talking about associations. We're going to talk about associations, association trends, where you're at right now. Then we're going to talk about what the trends in conferences related to associations, and then how specifically the conference fits. I pulled examples from 3 different meeting and event associations that are just examples that's happening across a variety of industries, to show that even though they all have the same target market, they all have a different strategy. Because they have a different strategy, their conference fits in a different way. We are going to talk a lot about strategy today. So we're going to start at the top of the funnel, and I will have a participatory question for you. So you'll all have to answer that one. It'll be really interesting to see what your answers are. So first, what is the role of an association? Associations, just this. This is the most words you'll see on the slide. Associations advocate for their industry, provide members with information, education, career development, and networking opportunities, connect employers in the industry with highly qualified talent. So I think sometimes we think of associations, like I'll say I create because this is Nina here. Sometimes we just think it's where we go for professional development. But associations, the definition and strategy of an association is actually much wider than that. So it's not just where we go, that's a very, very important piece. We are the members, and it needs to be what we need, but we are also advocating for our industry at large, which in iCree's case is the hospitality and tourism and restaurant education, right? And then connecting employers in the industry with that qualified talent. So very important to think about it from all the areas of an association, because that also tends to fall into where does your conference fit into your association model. All right, these are all associations here that you may or may not have heard of. We've got TTRA, we've got the International Hotel and Restaurant Association, PCMA, MPI. We've got the American Association of University Professors. We've got ACE, where I'm at right now. There's actually a lot of associations for higher education, for university professors, though we tend to only stick within ICRE, I feel, in our bubble. There's a lot out there for university professors, which is really interesting. And this becomes important when we're talking about our unique value proposition and what is our differentiating kind of strategy. So this slide could be a million logos, but these are kind of ones that we've thought of. They're all associations. So what is the association landscape like right now? Well, in 2021, 47% of associations had reported declines in membership. Of course, everyone's sitting there saying COVID, COVID, COVID. And then in 2022, an additional 33% of associations reported declines in memberships. So I think sometimes it's so easy for us to just like blame the pandemic, but you never want to waste a crisis for innovation. And this is where a lot of associations are starting to really fall into two groups of, are you going to thrive? Or are you going to barely survive, right? Those are kind of the two groups. You're either closing or barely surviving, or you're thriving. And the associations that really have been thriving have been kind of creating this multimodal approach, incorporating technology, but also really changing a lot of things to recruit new members, younger members. So millennial, your Gen Zs, or your Gen Xers, everybody that's like very top heavy on baby boomers or older members, they're really struggling right now. And because of that, newer associations are coming in to kind of compete for that younger demographic. And those are the ones that are typically thriving. So this was from the Membership Marketing Benchmark Report. I have some different references throughout, but this is what the landscape we're in right now. So we're setting a baseline of where our associations right now. And this isn't just hospitality tourism. This is all associations, right? There's an association for everything. So all of you beautiful people, 12 people on this call, what do you feel is the single most important thing that an association can deliver to each of its members? Drop it in the chat. Single most important thing. What do you think it is? So you can't write a list, okay? Can't write a list. Because I know some of you people, you're like, well, everything's important, right? Okay, so we've got networking, connections, value, ROI, trends. Oh, Fred, you're not on like my little ribbon on the top. So education, ways to grow. Fred's cheating, he's putting in multiple. Networking, development chances. What other ones? All right. So the most popularly answered but incorrect choices are the following: education, advocacy, research, expert content, thought leadership, networking, or those that say all of the above. So all important, absolutely, definitely important. But if we think about all of these things as dominoes, right? What's the starting domino that is going to impact all of the other things? And you might all kind of argue with what I'm about to put up here, but this has been shown by the Membership Research Report and several other association research center studies. But the number one answer is relevance. So none of those other things are important. Networking is not important. Education is not important if it's not relevant. And relevance means something different for every single one of us. So relevance to Jeff and relevance to me and relevance to Christine could all be completely different things. And relevance might be completely different categories. And Fred said relevance changes during our careers. Yes, absolutely. And it's really important if you're an association that you have to remain relevant, or you have to diversify your offerings for relevance. We're going to talk about that in terms of conference strategy, because some things that PCMA and MPI are doing in terms of offering additional offerings depending on the length of your career that you've been in have been really interesting. But relevance, number one, keep that in mind, because associations are oftentimes lacking value and relevance, or perceived value or perceived relevance, as stated by former and current members. So very, very important. Okay. So thinking about this, by sheer scale or monopoly, an association or an association event may be an industry must now, but that's only the case until someone delivers a more relevant and meaningful experience. This was a sentiment that I took from the reference on the next slide. This is very common that you'll start in a niche industry, and then you're in a niche industry, and then competitors pop up. And we saw this a lot during COVID. There was a lot of new entrants to the field. And when you were online, it all mattered about the quality of the content. And now that we're back to in-person, quality of content can be throughout the year, but that in-person interaction is really thriving more on connections and networking, but relevant connections and networking, right? Very important. So I'm at the American Council of Education conference right here, which is geared towards presidents and chancellors. There's 1,000 attendees here. Most are presidents and chancellors. There's like 30 which I'm one. Obviously, I'm not a president or a chancellor. And so the relevance of the networking, like if you have one president and 100, just regular faculty, they're not going to share the same type of struggles or networking that they need to be discussing. So making sure that you structure the networking is equally as important. All right, beating that to death. Okay, so association outlook and trends. So there's 3 big ones. So 1, for-profit companies are going to target members of associations and that education space while hosting larger events at a much better value. We're already seeing this. So in the meetings and events industry in particular, people tend to think about PCMA, MPI, IAEE. They might think there are some really strong associations in Europe as well. You could think about IMEX, right? But the #1 largest conference is actually not by any of those associations. The largest conference is actually the Connect conference, which is a corporate. It's a for-profit conference, and it's huge. And they bring in like vice presidents, and they bring in like big name people, and the education's really, really large. And that Connect conference is larger than a lot of the associations, and they have the money to go into supporting that and bringing people in. They're seeing this because they can bring it, they can subsidize, they can say, Kristen, I'm going to pay for you to come. You're going to be a hosted buyer. But in order for that, you have to engage with our products, or you have to sign up for my product in order to be eligible to come. And they've created their own exclusive member group. We're seeing this across industries now, where these for-profit companies are coming in, and they're starting their own big events, and they're really killing it with education and content. And it's super relevant. And most of the time, these for-profit companies also have data, massive data analytics that they can pull from, and personalization and artificial intelligence and things like that, where they can anticipate your needs, but they can also do customized matchmaking. So they can say, you and you need to meet, so we're going to make sure you guys meet at this event. So this is the #1 trend that's happening. And there are for-profit companies that are just buying events outright, which is really kind of fascinating. All right, second big association outlook and trend. Members want a value for their membership all year long. So you don't want to stuff 90% of that over a 3-day conference. I said 3-day conference because the average conference length for an association is 3 days. So members they're more likely to drop their membership and just pay an increased cost for the conference if they decide to go to the conference nowadays. If it's not wrapped into some type of internal funding mechanism, then to actually pay for the membership. If the conference is the only thing that's seen of value, then they're just not paying for the membership now. So value for the membership all year long. This provides an incredible opportunity to diversify incomes as well, so revenue streams, in addition to just their conference. So a lot of associations after the pandemic have realized their conference cannot be their major line item anymore. They have to really diversify revenue streams if they're going to survive. And the third one, which I broke into subpoints, but it's all pretty much personalization. Making data-informed decisions, listening to members, and use personalizations and technology to customize offerings. I think before COVID, a lot of associations could sit there and just say like, okay, since we're in NINA, I'll use iCreate because it's the common example here. You might not all go to PCMA or MPI, but like if you're sitting there and you're like, I don't want to go to Phoenix in July. Well, like people should listen, right? And like put us in a desirable destination on a beach or something. I don't know. So listen to the members. Now, of course, you have to balance that with costs, but you can't upset your members, just in favor of cost. So really listening to members about what they want, what they need. If they want to get outside the hotel, bring them outside the hotel. If they want more structured networking, give them more structured networking. If they want less panels, give them less panels, right? So really listening, and then using this personalization and technology to customize the offerings, really, really important. So those are the association trends. If you have any questions about associations at large, can definitely address them. It's almost like I timed that. That question just popped up in the chat, like the great time. How do you design a slide deck that you're in the deck? I'll talk about that at the end for sure, for everybody who wants to know that. This is like the #1 best kept secret to Zoom. I feel like I do presentations with this all the time, but I will answer that question. All right. Those that don't make inherent changes to include younger members will continue to decline. I already talked about that in terms of associations from that, but those associations with more millennials and Gen Xers will continue to thrive. Again, that's a generalized statement, so it's really about relevance. Just because you have more millennials, it doesn't mean you're going to thrive. It has to be relevant. We just are seeing a lot more of that. Also goes into one event cannot be all things to all people. So we're going to talk about that at the event side. All right, a must-have, and something that a lot of associations don't have, a detailed multi-year success strategy. So common in association terms, I've been on a lot of boards at this point. It seems to be a common thing in associations to have a 5x5. That's what they call it internally. It's the last 5 years for associations and the next 5 years of associations. So tracking 5 years and then, kind of looking 5 years out. And not every association does that, though. You could have a 4-year plan or a 3-year plan. But very interestingly, how many associations have a detailed multi-year strategy? Great question. We will talk about that. When we're sitting there talking about strategies, I'm going to talk about the 3 meeting event ones and how they all chose a very different strategy. So PCMA, the Professional Convention Management Association, which started as association planners, but now is pretty much all meeting professionals. PCMA chose a strategy where they're going to be a very corporate-like strategy. They're going to operate as a single unit, and they're going to buy, merge, consolidate with other associations. So PCMA is really visionary and futuristic, and they care a lot about controlling the quality of their education. So they have decided that they are just going to buy up others. So PCMA last year bought up SEMA, which was the Corporate Events Marketing Association. PCMA just acquired the Event Leadership Institute for Education. So they're really saying, what is the future of our industry in 3 years? And then they're buying into those markets. They just bought the Event Marketing Association in the United Kingdom. So rather than just like organic kind of growth into different areas, they're just buying into their growth, which is very similar to what Freeman did. If you're familiar with them as a supplier, they just said, okay, we're going to get into tech. And so then they like bought Encore. They've since diverged or whatnot. But so they just they were like, okay, we need a lot of trucking. So they bought a trucking, company. They bought a logistics company. So PCMA, that's their strategy. They say, we are the futurists. We care a lot about our quality of education, and we can only control that if that's in-house. So we're going to keep everything in-house. So that is their strategy. MPI, which is Meeting Professionals International, same target market of event professionals there. They've decided that they're going to go on more of a licensing model and partnership model. And they're really going to increase their online education offerings. So MPI does a lot with licensing, where they'll say, okay, like San Diego State University with Carl, it's like, okay, we're going to put our name on your program as a partnership, and you'll pay us some money, and then we'll advertise for you, right? So it's a partnership. They've also done the same with, I think, at Indiana University at the Keller College of Business. They're a partnership, so it's all licensing. They're like, okay, you can use our name and we'll advertise you on our site. So not all in-house, and they don't really control the quality, though of course they do, kind of like what we do, accreditation checks, right? The second area that they saw was online education. So if you were to compare Convening Leaders and the World Education Conference, which is their Convening Leaders is PCMA, World Education Conference, MPI, people majority of the time they would say that meeting leaders had better education and MPI had better networking. That's like pretty, I mean, any of the meeting professionals on here is probably, you would say the same thing. In PCMA, that's why a lot of educators tend to go to PCMA, whereas MPI doesn't even have like a faculty forum. So MPI said, we want to focus on this networking. This is our differentiating factor, but we still need quality education. So they really upped their online education, and they have a whole MPI Academy now. They have all these certificate courses. And now just recently, they've started offering kind of like where we have our accreditation for hospitality and tourism programs that you can like be an accredited program. They also have accreditation for event programs. So you can be an MPI accredited program that they do accreditation now. So that's their strategy. Very different than PCMA, but that's their strategy, and that's their differentiating factor, and that's how they make their decisions. Then you have IAEE, which a lot of event professionals don't necessarily interact with the IAEE a lot. They tend to be more trade show focused, but they also have expanded into a lot of the other meeting professional roles. They're really known for advocacy. They were the ones that really spearheaded getting our competencies on the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They're super education focused, and they're a trade association. So they're essentially member run. And it's a one cost. So like if I'm the University of Nebraska and I buy a membership with them, all of my students and all of my faculty are included. So they have become a really great resource for education. And they also do partners. So they understand that not everybody can come to their annual conference because it's during finals week every year at Expo in December. So they're like, okay, well, we support education. So how can we support education? So they actually sponsor the faculty engagement program at IMEX America because they're super passionate about advocacy and education. Totally different strategy that has very little to do with their actual annual conference. So it's important to understand the association strategy. So that way you can figure out where does that annual conference kind of fit in that way. So 3 associations, 3 exact same target markets, but all a totally different strategy. So what about the conference? What's going on with the conference? Some conference statistics. 49% of associations do not have a strategic meeting plan in place. 49% from North Star Meetings Group. Of the 51% that do, so of only those 51%, 41% of them do not have measurable metrics. They're just like guiding principles of like, we're going to provide the best education ever. So nothing that's like measurable. How do you define success? And when you don't define what success looks like, the natural metrics that you fall on are number of attendees and profit. That's what it always falls on. But that's actually not most associations' goals. Most associations don't define success by number of butts in seats at their annual event and amount of profit just from their annual event. That doesn't make a successful association. So really defining what that looks like. Of all the associations that were measured, even the ones that do and do not, 66% reported not having any measurable metrics at any kind in any of their planning. It's like, we're all in higher education, right? Some do research, some do not do research, but we all understand the importance of like tracking these things, and it's not there. These are some really interesting quotes from this study from North Star Meetings Group that were from these like certified meeting professionals who are planning these events. In all honesty, neither group are managing as much of a plan beyond we're holding our annual meeting. It's just like incredible, right? One of the elements that we found most shocking is that measuring meeting success seemed mostly to mean looking at overall attendance numbers and little else. And that could have worked, pre-COVID in the 2000s, the 1990s, but that's not working now. Now it really needs to be a lot more about quality. So this transition from quantity to quality, attendees will pay more and the association will provide more value. Long-term, doing so will likely result in increased revenue. So I've been to several events so there was one event in Europe that I went to, and I had to pay a little bit out of my own pocket. I had to get a grant, I had to fund it. probably cost me $7,500. And it was like the most life-changing event. And I would go back to it any single year. I'm at this event right now. I'm probably, the university's paying for it, but it's like $5,000. And it's in the 3 sessions I've been in, it's been the most impactful sessions of any event I've been to in the last year. So having that quantity and having the right people in the room are really, really important rather than just having people in general, right? And that's when you could talk about diversifying what your offerings are. If you have some entry level faculty or if you have PhD students, if you have faculty, if you have senior faculty, if you have administrators, they all need different things. So we could kind of diversify some of our offerings. All right. So what does PCMA do? PCMA, so they have their convening leaders conference, but they also have some other major summits. So they have their SEMA summit, which they bought when they bought the Corporate Events Marketing Association. But they really started diversifying. They said, okay, convening leaders has a big wow factor. If you've ever been a convening leaders, you know what I'm talking about. Convening leaders is like a really big wow factor. What PCMA found is that any media professionals or faculty, even anybody that had been there for like more than 6 or 7 years, you were like, okay, that's another PCMA, right? So what they did is they started placing way more emphasis on EduCon, which is in the summer. So they're opposite, one's in January, one's in the summer. And that really became like a think tank. Like it's really advanced education. It's a smaller group. So convening leaders might have 3,000 or 4,000. EduCon has like 600. It's a smaller group, way more advanced education, way higher quality education, and different people in the room. So they've created a funnel of like, okay, if you're no longer happy here with these offerings, we recognize we can't be all things to all people. And instead of trying to be all things to all people, we're just gonna make sure that each one's kind of targeting a different user persona, right? And then they also do a lot with webinars and programs and things throughout the year. But they said, okay, we're going to really kind of put some extra emphasis on a second conference throughout the year. So it's not just one and done, right? So they've added they already had that offering, but they really emphasized a lot more with it. So that's what PCMA did. They kind of kept their annual conference, the wow factor, getting people into PCMA, getting people obsessed with PCMA, and then continuing to build depth in knowledge, right? So not just breadth at a higher level, but like really building that deep knowledge. What has MPI done? MPI is so fascinating. They're a great case study. So they also, like you could see up here, the Thought Leader Summit, they also did the same thing as PCMA. They said, we have a lot of people who have been in our organization for 6 or 7 years. We're going to create something that's deeper. And they created this Thought Leader Summit that's deep, right? Deep knowledge, much smaller group, much smaller crowd. But because their model is licensing, they've kept their World Education Conference, so WEC. They haven't changed anything with it. They haven't changed anything with their WEC at all. And what they've started doing is they've started licensing and supporting other events that they can send their members to. So you can see here in this this top one, the MPI Exchange, it's kind of like a hosted buyer. They'll host planners to come to your conference at their cost. They're now a partner of the conference. They're now supporting the planners, so the planners find value in their organization, but they're sending them to different events that they're not even involved in, right? It's kind of like actually a fascinating model. So at IMEX America, they host Smart Mondays. They host all the education. It's not an MPI event, but they are hosting like the pre-conference of the event. They send people to IBTM World through like hosted buyer. So I'm sitting there like, MPI is so awesome. They're paying for me to do this thing. Now I have to engage with them, have so many meetings with them or do their products or whatever, but then I get to go to a totally different event. So really fascinating kind of model that involves the fact that they don't have to own another event, which is really interesting. Outside of the one they added up here up here for their advanced knowledge, right? Okay. And so what has IAEE done? Well, IAEE, which is all about advocacy and education, they truly are a multimodal organization. They have something, I think, every single day of the entire year. They have said, okay, members, what do you need? And the members have told them, and they have generated virtual programming around it. So they had a lot of trade show exhibitors that were then getting into meeting planning, but they didn't know meeting planning. So they said, okay, we're going to do a meeting planning. We're going to do like a 6-series session on meeting planning. And it's like once a month for 6 months. And they started it and it was super successful. They said, okay, what do we need? Well, we need to update what our competencies are for the federal government. So we're going to do this survey. We're going to do this research. What did these people over here need? Well, during COVID, again, relevance, really important to be relevant. Everybody was saying, we don't know how to work technology. So they did a ton of series on technology, the contracting, legal. So they've become like a procurer of information. They're like, okay, Suzanne, you're my member. You're telling me you need this. I have this expansive network and I have funds and I'm able to say, okay, so you're saying that you need this. I'm going to go grab this person over here who's an expert in this field, and I'm going to run a session, an online session. And their sessions have incredible attendance. They had me do a event design session for them, and we had like over 30 people attend online. And it was people from all these really fascinating backgrounds. So they've built really good membership and offerings just by remaining relevant. So when you sit there and think about these, and then I've got one last slide, and then we're going to open it to all your Q&A, including the Zoom thing, of course. So when you sit there and you think about how does the conference fit? Well, the conference really, it depends on your association strategy. The problem is a lot of associations don't have a strategy. And if they do have a strategy, it doesn't have measurable metrics. So we could sit here and we could talk about, in a perfect world, what would we do if we were talking about, well, like NINA, when we're not all from NINA, I know, but like if we've got NINA or ICRE or whatever, what would that strategy look like? And how does that annual conference fits into that, right? We've got similar to PCMA is a regional model. So PCMA is broke up by region. MPI, because they're so focused on networking, it's broke up by city. Right. So city, every major city has an MPI and it's much more networking within that city. Whereas PCMA is much more regional because it's super education focused. And then IAEE is regional as well. So ICRE is regional. So like how does the Rise and Grind and how to like Central Cree's First Fridays, how do they all fit? How do they work together and collaborate and not compete? How do we show that we're providing value? If there's anything I've learned from this event today with all these presidents and chancellors, and all of my experience with ICRE, PCMA, MPI, IAEE, all the others, the real root of everything, and it's in families and relationships and everyone, it's all communication, like communicating value, communicating the storytelling aspect. That's really where everyone's struggling, is telling the right story and communicating the right value, but you have to have it first to begin with, right? So that was a lot. There's like a lot of brain dumping at one moment, like lots of uploading and lots of examples. And like any good presentation, I left it with, well, it depends, right? Which is like such a lawyer answer. Well, it depends, of course. But the number one issue is a lot of associations don't have a strategy. And if you don't have a strategy, you'll never know how your conference fits into it because you don't have a strategy, right? And so what is it? Why are you in existence? And what are your metrics for that? So yeah. All right, questions. So I'll answer the first one because it's Zoom, and that will give you a lot of time to sit there and you like my hotel room? Then I'll sit there and give you time to come up with some additional questions around the content. So if you have a PowerPoint and you want to put yourself in the little picture there, it's as simple as going to share screen like you always do. But then you, instead of clicking basic, what you're naturally on basic where it says like screen and your things, you would actually toggle over in the very top to where it says advanced. And then it's the first option, PowerPoint as virtual background. A little pop-up box will come up and then you select your PowerPoint. And then I am in Zoom here. So then cool things, I stayed stationary the whole time in this presentation, but you can adjust your size, like look, I'm little, you can make it bigger, like the whole slide. You can also move yourself around. So this is like the default, but like I can move myself, which is really fun. Sometimes I'll do it, like I'll have a red, so theatrics, right? Like sometimes I'll like have a red glove and then I can like move myself to point to things to accentuate them. It all depends on your audience, right? This is a good audience. So just different things there. So it really is that simple. Just make sure that you flip through your slides and make sure you're not covering up pictures or content. So you can see a lot of my slides had things like on the opposite side or up in the corner because you have to leave room for your face, right? Simple, but if you don't say it, then you lose that. So.
Kristen, thank you so much. So you say the function is embedded in the Zoom, not in your PowerPoint.
Yep.
On the
Yeah.
function.
You have to have your presentation as a PowerPoint, but the function is embedded in Zoom. So you just click share screen and then advanced, and then it's PowerPoint as virtual background. Yep.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good question. It's like my favorite things. What other questions do we have? Tom, you made it from your SIG group. So much eye cream one more.
The funny thing is some of my SIG group is here.
Well, good. Look at you.
Well, actually, I wanted to add something to Kristen because you were talking about earlier, and I couldn't remember what I was going to say, and you finally actually brought it up in the summary. But I think one of the things that IAEE does, and obviously Kristen and I are on all these things together, or every conference together.
Yeah.
But one of the things is that I love about IAEE, again, working with them as well too, but they ask us, they ask their members, what do you want? How much do you want? How little do you want? When do you want it? What method do you want? Do you want a Zoom? Do you want it in person? Do you want it to be small groups? Do you want it to be large? And I think that that's the differentiating factor for them as well too. And again, being part of MPI and NPCMA as well too, they don't do that as much. And so that's kind of where we're able to do that in our own federations as well too. And I plan on, when I'm hosting a conference in a couple of years on a cruise ship, I plan on asking everybody, what do you want?
Yeah.
I'm not planning the conference for me. I'm planning a conference for what they want. And I'm going to do an unconference and to say, hey, I want to talk about what you want to talk about and find that commonality with everybody. Because when you do that, they're more invested. They're going to pay the money to go.
Well, Tom, one point on to your point there, and you already know this, but for the benefit of everyone, the number one thing that you can do to increase your engagement in surveys is to report out what people have said and ask something else. So often we ask for data and then nothing, you know nothing, right? Like I just filled out this 15-minute survey. What are you doing with it? What are you not doing with it? That's the number one element for success and engagement in surveys. When I worked in the medical association field before switching to academia full-time, there was a conference in Nevada that was at 1,200 members, like consistently for almost 9 years. And they brought me in. And in 1 year, we took it from 1,200 to 1,750 just using this metric. Because I would say, hey, I have a question for all of you. And it's 3 questions. Can you answer it? And then 2 weeks later, I'd be like, based on all of your responses, this is what you told us. This is what we're doing to change it. I have another 3 questions for you. Can you answer these 3 questions? Then 2 weeks later, I'd be like, awesome. This is what you said. This is what we're doing to change it. I have another 3 questions for you. The number of times those emails were forwarded and people bought into that. Same thing happened. I started a new event here in Lincoln. I say here, I'm in DC right now, but I started a new event in Lincoln. And it was with a partner organization. They were expecting about 35 meeting planners to be local. And we ended up having 120 event professionals from 6 states and an online presence in 9 countries using this same exact thing. It's like, hey, we're doing a thing. What do you want? Okay, cool. Short and simple, not like 20 million questions. Okay, cool. Based on this, all the way down to the schedule, I was like, okay, here's our projected schedule. Do you see a lot of conflicts? Give us your feedback. And then overwhelmingly, people said, I want these 2 sessions at the same time. And that are the same time to be separate. So we changed the schedule, right? And people were so engaged. And then we asked questions like, okay, like, what's your favorite thing for breakfast? And it was donuts. So then we had like a donut wall and we put like, Stephanie's favorite is chocolate sprinkle or whatever. Just like the little personalization aspects where they can see themselves and their voice in your events and not just like you're the sage on the stage, pie in the sky, somewhere else making decisions. that could be informed based on my survey that I took forever and a day ago, but I'm totally not engaged in the process, right, at that point. So great bringing that up, Tom, for sure. What else?
I have a quick question. Is
Sure.
there an underlying thing to this of how do we change ICRE?
I answered the question that was brought to me. The question was association models and how the conference fits. And I didn't ask questions, and that's what I presented.
Well, I mean, I don't think any of us on the call would think that this isn't a conversation we should have at ICRE, because we are kind of having some of these conversations, and we constantly talk about how the federation conferences sometimes compete with the national conference and those challenges. And then my question was going to be, Kristen, is, how about when an association, how much of the conference should be dependent upon as a revenue generator type of model? So like for ICRE, that's very much the way, where some of the other associations, it's not, the bigger associations like PCMA, MPI, where, that's not probably the main focus in terms of the overall association, because they're getting much more revenue, other sponsorships, etc. And I think that sometimes may direct where we go with the ICRE conference in terms of location, how we execute it, right? Because we're just focusing on that. We need to make a certain amount of money versus all the things you just talked about. That's with my personal opinion. I'm sure others may agree.
Yeah, well, so the opinion of myself, Dr. K, Kristen, Malek, not representing, Central Korea or ICRE in any way. I think there's a lot to be said that a lot of associations are recognizing they can't have one conference that meets the needs for everybody. And so we're seeing this even at IMEX in our very simple faculty engagement program, which is 50 people. A lot of people who are veterans who have been there for 6 or 7 years, they're like, I don't find value in this anymore. I'm not coming. And so we're like, okay, well, what do we do to make sure we're attracting all these younger people, but then we're still providing this value? And it would be diversification. Like there is a role for all of the regional CREs, absolutely. But the annual conference, in my opinion, the opinion of one, it tries to be everything to everybody. Like it's all the research for all the PhD students and master students, because like we have to have that. And then it's also like all the SIG groups, because we have to have that. And then it's all the teaching, and then it's also the administration. And what you end up having is so much in such a short time period, and they all compete with each other, that everybody leaves unsatisfied. Everybody's upset because nobody's actually getting what they need. So then there's no perceived value there, because you're only getting a piece, and it's so expensive. Like it's $2,500 all in with your flights and all your stuff. That's what we were talking about before we started recording. Like your flight $600 and your registration $600 is $200 a night, all these things. But so many of the sessions that you yourself want to go to compete with something else, that it's not providing all of the value for everybody. And so what does that look like? Maybe you do split off your PhDs. Maybe you do split off your administrators, and they can still obviously go. But if you're trying to be relevant, maybe diversifying offerings, but then you have to get all the regions on the same page. Like we have a strategy. What is the role of the regional CREs? Like, is it all teaching, right? And then the annual conference is all research, or, there just needs to be a strategy, and no strategy is ever right or wrong. It just has to be a strategy that everybody buys into, and then you make decisions on it, right? So that's the opinion of one person strategist, right? So I think you all kind of probably agree, but since this is being recorded and put online, hi, Fran. That's just my opinion.
So to that quick question, it's the slide that you showed earlier. It's 90 pounds of sugar in a 10-pound bag, and shoving everything into one and hoping, crossing fingers that it gets everything. When it does, check a box, and basically that's what it does, is check a box. But it's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
you just, I mean, I leave that every single year exhausted in a good way, but also in a bad way of going, oh my gosh, my head hurts. I just need to go away from people for a while and go back to my corner.
Yeah.
And I completely understand it. And that's kind of where I just think that as we move forward, and I believe that from bringing on the tech person, from bringing on the emails that we get are so much better now, the communication. So I think that they're moving towards a better value system of offering value to us, giving the information, having this up. Normally we wouldn't see this if we didn't really have the emails, but these emails have been a lot better on like on the Mondays. Getting that information out is helping us see the value of going, oh gosh, you know, normally I wouldn't have gone to this, but now I have this really great email that came out with, you know, beyond just words, there's pictures on there that help us create that value for ourselves as well too. So I think they're
and Tom, I think we also have to keep in mind, like, iCree is not like a funnel in and of itself. So, right, if you've ever been on a strategy call with me, you know exactly what I'm about to say. But like, what is the problem with recruitment, retention, changes, all these things? It's the system, right? The system is not, it's a static system that's not very open to change. So we want to do all these things, but can we, right? We want to do all these things, but also like I just got a $250,000 grant. Why can't I give myself a raise out of that? You don't have the money to give me a raise. Why can't I get a raise, right? There's so many things that's like a system thing. So when you sit there and say like, okay, well, iCree, we have to have research because nobody can come if our universities, if you're not presenting research, right? Well, that's not something iCree can fix, but that's something that we could talk about our programs with, right? We could sit there and be like, okay, what is the #1 reason why people meet in person now? It's for networking. 56% of respondents to an association member survey say they get their quality content throughout the year in different modes, and they go in person for quality structured networking with the right people in relevant situations, right? So if this is true, then why can't we find another mode for, like, why can't you approve our funds to go to make these really relevant networks that's not revolved around presenting to a room that has nobody in it except for other presenters? Because we're all there to network, right? We're also there to like make memorable experiences, which involve getting outside the hotel. So, you know, it can be frustrating when not set up properly. You know, at the last conference, I know a lot of people didn't go to the panels in the morning because they wanted to go experience DC, right? They wanted to go experience DC and it wasn't built into the schedule. There was no time to go do that. And so that can be frustrating from a meeting planner perspective of like, well, the room's half empty and I brought in these speakers, but it's all strategy and design in that way. So some of it's talking to our universities too, of like, do I have to present a poster to go? And then if that's true, can I not do electronic posters like the day before, where everything's up? Is it like, we're not actually talking at our posters. Why do we need an hour for that? Like, why can't they all be on an online repository? Also, we're spending $75 printing on paper that no one's gonna look at. And then we have to lug on an airplane. Like, it's just so unreal, and we're killing trees, right? It's the whole process is just so antiquated. And there's so many other things that we could do with it. It just takes the courage and strategy to sit there and be like, we're gonna do posters different and do it differently, right? We spend 4 hours across 3 different sessions doing posters where we're all just standing around talking anyway. So I don't know.
And it's hard to hear people talking because there's so many people in that room at the same time. And Tom, to your point about, I think there are things that are moving in the right direction, because I've been on some planning calls about the conference, looking at less panels, shortening the time, hopefully allowing for more, as you talked about, thought leadership, deeper conversation. They asked all the presidents, they asked myself and Susan Gordon to like lead a discussion between all the presidents and vice presidents about how the federations could get involved. And we sent a bunch of stuff and I haven't heard back, but you know, we talked about why can't we do something together as federations? Why does it have to be that NENA competes against SESCA and against Central and against Western Federation? Why can't we do something that's meaningful, that's important to all of us, and we all chip in, even if it's a cost structure at the same time, instead of, because then you're like, well, I can't go here and I can't go there. And some of us belong to like 3 SIGs, and that's a whole nother issue. So I think
but then also, Jeff, you have to be careful with that. This is what higher education is dealing with right now. If you've never heard of that additive mindset, I would strongly look it up. we're all adding things. Well, if we add this
Yep.
committee, if we add this initiative, if we add this thing, if we add this SIG, if we like, so why are we all in 3 SIGs? Because a lot of them overlap in some way based on competency, right? But we all had to have our own niche because we all have to have our name and our label. But like sitting there saying like, okay, well, how can we be in a reduction mindset? We're all overworked and underpaid. We're all time scarce. We're all stressed. We all have mental health issues, right? So how can we cut back down to the basics? Or it's unfeasible that we're going to scratch everything and start from ground zero, right? But like, what can we minimize? What can we cut? And the schools that are doing that very well are seeing actually increases. Like they're having clarity of messaging, increase in retention, recruitment of students and faculty and staff. The additive approach is a huge problem. Like we all just sit there and say, we need another one of these. We need another, that's more meetings, less time, right? So how can we go into a reduction mindset? I think is super helpful too.
No, and I certainly meant that from a reduction, like, so we're not duplicating efforts. and
Exactly.
We're
Yeah,
scaling things down.
Yeah, for sure. I know we all have ICRE in common. This is not an ICRE like complaint session. It's a strategy. Like associations and conferences there. So yes. Other questions? We have 5 minutes. Well, if you learned nothing new, at least you learned how to put your face in Zoom on your PowerPoint now. Hopefully you learned a lot more than that, but that is that's one good thing that you can learn there. So
All right, thank you.
all being on here. This is so fun. So good to
Thank
see
you,
so many of your
Kristen.
faces.
Thank
Yes,
you, Kristen. Thank
absolutely.
you so much. And so if you don't have any question, everybody, thank you so much for joining us in this morning, and enjoy your beautiful April weekend.
Thank you, everyone. See you later.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great job.
Thank you.